afternoon, everyone. Thank you for joining us and welcome to our webinar examining diversity and inclusion in the workplace and the impact that the diversity mark can have on an organisation. Before we get started, I'd just like to mention that this session will be recorded and made available to all those who have signed up. You'll also find a great collection of recent webinars on a wide variety of topics at our website, charterdedaccountants.ie/Ulster. Today's webinar addresses the important subject of diversity. With our expert panel of speakers, we'll examine the impact that the diversity mark can have, the process involved, and the experience of some local companies that have been through the process. Leading us off today will be multi-award winning professional marketer and entrepreneur Nuala Murphy. As president of the Lean In Network Belfast, Nuala has led and scaled the Lean In movement across Ireland over the past nearly 8 years. She is director at TWIRPS, the Women Investor Ready project. And as interim head of business at Diversity Mark, Nuala is channeling her expertise, leadership and passion into building a more equal and inclusive society, working with companies from all sectors across Ireland and the UK. Alongside Nuala, we have Jenny Moore of Danske Bank and current Vice Chair of CBI's Future Leaders Forum. In August 2021, Jenny led the introduction of the bank's parental bereavement leave and pregnancy loss policies. Then in December 2021, Jenny designed the bank's new Dni policy. She is also an award winner, having been named In-House Lawyer of the Year in 2021 and Irish News Lawyer of the Month in December 2021. We're also delighted to welcome Siobhan Mckenna, Head of Quality, Diversity and Inclusion at the Public Appointments Service, the primary recruiter for the civil service in Ireland. Siobhan returned to Dublin last year after spending 20 years in non-profit and public sectors in London, where she was instrumental in delivering the Mayor of London's Equality, Diversity and Inclusion workplace priorities. Completing the lineup is Jill Michael, an experienced talent manager with over 15 years experience within the fields of law, financial services, oil and gas and engineering. Working with the Ulster Society's legal partner A&L Goodbody, she leads the talent strategy in Northern Ireland, working closely with the partnership. Please feel free to put your questions for this expert panel into the Q&A box at the bottom of your screen. The Q&A is now open, so feel free to type away. We have a lot to get through today, so let's kick off with this expert panel, and I'd love to welcome Nuala Murphy. Nuala?
Hi there, Maeve, and good morning, everybody. Thank you so much for the introductions and for having me involved today. The main purpose of today's event, as Maeve said, is very much to discuss Diversity Mark and first of all, who we are, and also the importance of organisations in committing to building diverse and inclusive workplaces. So, from a Diversity Mark point of view, we are the awarding authority of diversity and inclusion. Organisations sign up to us to achieve 2 awards at this stage and soon to be a 3rd. So we start at bronze, which is focused on organisations committing to 3 gender roles within their organisation. Then there are further 2 goals from the broader diversity spectrum for silver, and both Danske Bank and A&L Goodbody are holders of the Diversity Mark Silver Award right now. And then soon to be in the future, we will be launching the Gold, which is really the next stage of accreditation for diversity and inclusion. Not only does it involve interviews with board level, it also includes an independent audit and a customer staff survey. When you become a Diversity Mark signatory, that is, you commit to building more diverse and inclusive workplaces by joining up with us. You've got access to a whole community of signatories like Danske, like A&L, who are on their journey. And there's one thing to note, that everyone's diversity and inclusion journey is completely different, starting from a different starting point, with different resources, with different opportunity to lean and stretch in different areas of the diversity and inclusion. So it's really important to understand that we can all do something with what we have, but the most important thing is to get started, to have a framework, and to publicly commit, but also internally commit to your staff that this is a priority for your organisation. And what's the best way to do that? Well, it's really to talk to people who have been on the journey. We call it the mark of progress. So someone individuals, organizations who have already started that journey, who are living and breathing it. And that's what today's all about. And without any more from me, you can find out who we are and get signed up and get all the information at Diversity Mark, and we'll pop that in the chat box. Resources will be available after. But I really want to hear for and jump into the presentations we have in store for you today from some fantastic people, visionary leaders who are leading the charge, and also for those who have got a wealth of experience in diversity and inclusion. So I'm going to hand over to Jenny and her team from Danske Bank, Nicola and Kerry, who will kick off their presentation today. Thank you very much, Jenny. Over to you.
Thanks, Nuala. And I'll just give us a second to get the slides up there. Brilliant. So just to say thank you very much for having us today, both to Ulster Chartered Accountants Ireland and to Diversity Charter Mark, who, Nuala, as you've mentioned, we're privileged to work closely with the Diversity Mark at Danske Bank, and you really have been pivotal in our own D&I journey. It's also really encouraging for me to be joined today by two of my colleagues at Danske, Kerry Phillips, who is our D&I partner, and Nicola Armstrong, our chair of Enable, Danske's disability network. We are striving to create a culture of conscious inclusion and active allyship at Danske Bank, where every colleague is an advocate. And I know both Kerry and Nicola are at the forefront of those ambitions for us. So just pausing for a moment on this slide, and I just wanted to share a quick anecdote with you. I was in Dublin at the weekend, and as I was walking along Grafton Street, I spotted a woman waving frantically at what I thought was definitely the person behind me. So it just shows you what happens when you don't wear your glasses. And as it turned out, it was an ex-colleague of mine who now lives and works in Dublin. She has just taken up a new role for Airbnb. And when I asked her how she was finding her new position, her response was, "Do you know what, Jenny? Within a matter of weeks, just really feel like I belong." I was so taken by this response. What an achievement for any employer to have new joiners saying that within a matter of 2 weeks of their start date and in a virtual or hybrid environment, they are creating a culture of the truest sense of belonging. I would be pretty confident that that is what we are all here striving for. And as we can see on the screen at Danske, we fundamentally value the difference of thought and perspective and a true sense of belonging for all colleagues. And when I was reflecting on Airbnb and their culture as a business, I was further reminded of what that looks like whenever I came across their response to the war in Ukraine, announcing last week that they will offer free short-term housing to up to 100,000 refugees fleeing Ukraine. A reason to be really proud of the company that you work for. We can skip the next slide there as I'll talk to the agenda as we go. But just to say for a moment on being proud of the organisation that you work for, I can truly say that reflects my own feelings about working for Danske Bank. Diversity, equity and inclusion is the fabric of our culture here at Danske, and we work hard to sustain that kind of environment for the people that work here, to make sure they feel empowered to bring their authentic selves to work. How do we do that? Well, it is a journey, and you'll note I'll use that word multiple times today. We do not hold ourselves out as being the finished product. We have many ambitions to drive and further embed our D&I strategy as an organisation. And as part of those efforts, in February of this year, we held our first ever Dni Spotlight Week, which saw the launch of our new D&I policy. More on that in a moment. But embedded within that policy are the principles of attracting, recruiting, retaining and retraining that are all entirely relevant to the context in which all the businesses on the call today will operate. Turning to the next slide then, and reflecting on my earlier thoughts on creating a culture of belonging from the outset of a candidate's experience with us at Danske, we work hard as a business to convey the importance that we place behind D&I right from inception, and that includes our executive team at the bank. In 2021, we launched our new contract of employment, setting the tone of inclusivity and belonging as we welcome new colleagues to the bank. We want our prospective colleagues to feel wanted, and part of that we know was through our use of imagery and representation, ensuring our language isn't unconsciously signalling towards a specific demographic and thereby ostracising a particular section of our community. Our recruitment team at the bank also play a pivotal role in this journey, and this year we will be taking all colleagues involved in recruitment and selection through our new equality law and diversity training, ensuring fairness and equality is at the heart of our recruitment and selection practices. On the next slide, I wanted to take a moment to share a little more on what our Dni Spotlight Week looked like and some tangible outputs from that. It goes without saying that Dni is fundamentally important to us all year round at the bank, but our Spotlight Week really provided us with an opportunity to enhance our focus as a business on Dni. It's important to all of us what support systems are available and encouraging colleagues to share their perspectives and lived experiences. Our focus is not a nice to have, nor an add-on, it is an absolute business, commercial and colleague imperative. Of course, an inclusive workplace that really makes colleagues feel as though they belong means different things to each individual, and I know Kerry will talk more about that during her session. We're committed to an approach that is thoughtfully created, actively championed and constantly evolving. And as part of that then, advocacy, allyship and accountability were just some of the themes we explored during our Spotlight Week. Some of the core activities that Kerry really led on were the launch of our Belong calendar. She launched her brilliant Dni quarterly blog. We had our Tea for 10 podcasts led by our digital transformation apprentice. And we really engaged in external promotion within the NI business community. We want the business community to know that Dni is part of our DNA at the bank, and we want to strongly convey that message. On to the next slide then. What about our Dni architecture here at Danske? Well, again, I know Kerry will talk to this, and in the interest of time, I don't want to labour too much on this slide, but I do feel it's important to share that of our 4 colleague-led affinity networks, each with an executive committee sponsor, we truly empower our networks and have an expectation of meaningful action, progress plans with ambition and targets, and accountability to Belong steering. I chair Danske Belong, which acts as our umbrella body for all things diversity, equity and inclusion, and sees our most senior leaders in the bank actively engaged in our strategic discussions on how we can further make demonstrable change and positive impact. On to our next slide. Our more recent Belong initiatives have really placed a focus on matters that we believe as a responsible employer are right to drive, and consequently provide support for colleagues during the moments that matter. And as well as being the right thing to do, we know in Northern Ireland, and it's a matter of public record, our equality protections and law have fallen behind those afforded to citizens elsewhere in the UK. So as our equality legislation most unfortunately continues to stagnate, this means as a business, we must take steps to do the right thing by colleagues, both current and prospective, and the legislative framework on the most part becomes less and less fit for purpose. So it really drives that for us. On to the next slide. One of the examples I can share at Danske Bank in 2021, we felt compelled to take steps to support our colleagues who may be victims of domestic abuse, recognising that while domestic abuse may occur in the home, its impact stretches into every aspect of a victim's life, including their work life. We know that only 5% of employers have specific domestic abuse policies or guidelines in place, but all will have staff that are affected by domestic abuse. And how can I say that? Well, we know that 1 in 3 women and 1 in 6 men will be subject to domestic abuse in their lifetime. And our programme of work on domestic abuse finds a home in our Belong ambition. And why Belong? Well, domestic abuse affects people right across every facet of our society. We know that anyone can be a victim, regardless of their diversity or socioeconomic background. We provide colleagues with a broad range of support in this context, and I wouldn't want to do this topic a disservice by rushing through it. But you can see there on screen our domestic abuse policy, along with our support hub for colleagues. And in terms of our proactive steps to support colleagues, as part of that offering, we provide paid leave of up to 10 days for relevant appointments with support services, or to recover from the stress and psychological impact of domestic abuse, with discretion to provide additional leave where required. We can skip past that slide there, please. And then, as was mentioned at the outset, in 2021, in the then absence of what can now be really welcomed as our new legislative framework in Northern Ireland in relation to parental bereavement, Danske Bank launched our parental bereavement and pregnancy loss policies, which provide a range of support for colleagues who may be impacted by pregnancy loss and parental bereavement. We do understand at the bank that no policy can fully cover the huge variations in emotional and physical response to a miscarriage, stillbirth, or bereavement of a child. What is needed is compassion, listening, empathy, and appropriate support. So our approach is fully inclusive in supporting all colleagues who suffer the loss of a pregnancy, whether that happens directly to them, their partner, or their baby surrogate mother, regardless of the nature of their loss and whatever their length of service is. And we've also publicly signed the Pregnancy Loss Pledge. Then, in the interest of time, just turning to the next slide, I will very briefly mention the support we've put in place for colleagues, no matter what their role in disciplinary or grievance policies. And we can just flip on one there. We know that for the alleged victim, the alleged protagonist, or the manager assigned to hear the case, these processes are all-consuming and stress-invoking. And therefore, one of our Belong ambitions saw us create a platform of support with a real focus on mental well-being and how we can work closely with our wellbeing partners in that regard. Kerry is going to talk to some of our key partnerships and stakeholder relationships momentarily, but I just want to acknowledge the support that we have received as a business from Diversity Mark. In January 2022, we were delighted to learn that we have maintained our silver accreditation with Diversity Mark for this calendar year. And then finally, looking ahead, what's on the horizon for us? Well, just to pick out a couple of the extracts on this slide, we will be making a bold commitment to strengthening our culture of flexible working, with a tailored focus acknowledging the different opportunities presented across our organisation. Historically, candidates have had a two-pronged approach to a job offer, that being salary and role. Now it's three-pronged: salary, role, and flexible working. And this is about embedding a framework that gives us greater flexibility to work with colleagues and hopefully complement our work towards achieving our gender target of 45% of women in senior roles by December 2024. And before I pass to Kerry, just to give you a very quick sneak peek of our new career break policy for Danske. As part of this new policy, we are signalling to our colleagues our encouragement of creativity. So if they want to explore by taking a career break, we will support them. We know a career break is a great way to take time out to do something you're passionate about, like travelling, volunteering, or pursuing a personal interest without having to leave a job that you love at Danske. And this is the essence of what we're trying to achieve, encouraging our colleagues to thrive. We know ultimately that their performance delivers our performance as a bank, and a career break can help with that in so many ways. And Kerry, I'll just pass over to you.
Thank you, Jenny, and hello everybody, and thanks for having me today. I am thrilled to be here, and I'm going to start with a quick introduction on myself. As Jenny mentioned, I am Kerry, the Diversity and Inclusion Partner for Danske Bank. I joined Danske Bank in 2019, but prior to that, I came from an educational background studying psychology and social policy, along with a number of years working in psychological and physical care for the most vulnerable individuals that we have in our society. If we could flip on to my next slide, please. I'm not going to spend a huge amount of time on this slide, as it will be available for those of you who are interested afterwards. But what you can see is our key milestones that we have successfully met over the last number of years. On the screen, you will see some of our key stakeholders, some really important support networks for us, and some really pivotal relationships in our diversity and inclusion journey. But right from 2017 up until now, you can see how we have been amplifying our focus on diversity and inclusion, truly laying those foundations and building blocks for some of our most recent successes that you can see in 2021 and 2022. Those being, we are thrilled. We have achieved a 50-50 gender split in our grade 7+ roles, which is our senior management, and have successfully maintained that to date. We have also successfully implemented paid working opportunities for individuals with disabilities in partnership with Stepping Stones, and Nicola will talk more to that. We have had a massive improvement in our stone wall in 2022, and we have been awarded a bronze recognition, which we are so proud of. And finally, most recently, we have been recognised as number 39 in the top UK 100 listings, number 4 in the financial services across the UK, and number 2 in Northern Ireland as the best companies to work for. 2022 is a really, really exciting year for us, and we have got key elements of our strategy expansion well underway. This is including a much more renewed and focused approach to collecting diversity and inclusion data across our organisation, but also really embedding intersectionality into our conversations, our policies, our practice, and our procedures. We really are so proud of our approach to diversity and inclusion and of the progress that we're making in this area. But at the same time, we also recognise we still have a lot further to go. We have some really stretching targets and ambitions for the future as well. The experience of our diversity and inclusion journey has included so many highlights, but also has included many challenges, which has given us some good food for thought. And along the way, we've learned some really valuable lessons that we are using to actively shape our journey in going forward. So this slide is where I think I can share the most value adds today. And as I have the privilege of sharing a small part of our diversity and inclusion journey with you today, I feel it's really fitting that I must share what we believe to be our most important lessons learned. My hope is that other organisations can learn from these perspectives so that they too can benefit from our diversity journey and experiences. So firstly, one size doesn't fit all, and I'm sure we can all think of times in our lives when we have felt included and times where we've certainly felt excluded. And that is the thing about inclusion. It is entirely unique to each and every one of us. And so to me, being included means that I feel respected, I feel appreciated, and that I feel I truly belong here. And to you, being included might mean something entirely different. And that's why a one-size approach will not work. It has to be meaningful to your colleagues, and your colleague voices have to be heard. Which moves me on to point number 2, and why it's so important that your colleagues' lived experiences must inform your policy and your strategy. And we truly do believe that our people-centric strategy and policies have been fundamental in our success. Point number 3, start from the top and engage the masses. Leadership, commitment, sponsorship, and drive will take your diversity and inclusion journey far within your organisation, but it won't be enough on its own to achieve true success. You need to pair this with engagement of the masses. Your Dni strategy should be inclusive for everyone. It should empower all of your people to benefit from change and ensure that you share your progress with them along the way. Embed it within your DNA, and you'll see our branding, you will see our logos. We have embedded diversity and inclusion truly into the DNA of our organisation. Real, systematic and sustainable change will not happen if your diversity and inclusion agenda is driven in a silo. Diversity and inclusion must be identified as fundamental to the individual and collective success of your organisation, of your teams, and of you and your personal success. This will not happen overnight, but the end goal should be get your organisation to a place where diversity and inclusion is naturally and intuitively woven into each discussion, into your activities, business processes, policies, procedures, and embedded from day one. And so it can be really easy to focus your efforts on the most senior roles in the organisation, because this might be where you see some of your largest diversity gaps. But equally, you should focus on talent from day one and from the ground up to ensure that you achieve really broad and sustainable progress. Targeting the areas with the biggest diversity gaps might achieve some short-term successes, but by having a restricted or targeted approach, it may limit your long-term impacts. Because if you don't effectively tackle the systematic changes that are earlier in your colleague career journeys, then you might just see those same diversity gaps in the succession pipeline at the top. This one is simple, recognising that there's no quick fix. It purely is the recognition that this won't happen overnight. So set some long-term goals and be ambitious, but also set some small interim targets and be accountable for your progress. Really important as well, widen your reach with the business case. We know that diversity and inclusion is the right thing to do, but it is also so much more than that. And when it's done right, it provides your organisation with so many performance benefits. And we know this through research and evidence. And to make this message real for more colleagues, it is essential to create and drive a robust organisation-focused business case that provides real benefits for individual and collective success. It goes back to the one-size-fits-all approach. What motivates one colleague, such as it being the right thing to do, may not necessarily motivate another, and they may be motivated by the numbers and the facts, and therefore you should present all angles of DNI to your organisation. Really important as well to collect and analyse your data. And for us in Danske Bank, this ensures that we understand our people, our workforce composition, and the lived experiences of our colleagues. Collecting diversity data helps us to identify the gaps, identify the issues and the biases that may be present, and helps us to work towards rectifying them. So we use this data in our planning. A data-driven approach is fundamental to creating a diversity and inclusion agenda that tackles the actual rather than the assumed barriers to diversity. And only when we understand and confront the actual barriers do you lay that groundwork for subsequent success. And equally, we use our data in our execution. And instead of choosing to adopt some new and creative policies and practices because we see them being talked about externally or within the sector, we use our data to identify and track relevant measures of success for our organisation. Being accountable for our progress is also really important to us. So without the commitment and accountability, we would struggle to move the needle on diversity in the way that we want, which is long-term, sustainable and real change. We hold ourselves accountable through Belong Steering that Jenny is the chair of, and we also hold ourselves publicly accountable through sharing our goals internally and externally. And I'm thrilled to finish up on point number 10, which is don't be afraid to rework. And this is really important because there is no diversity and inclusion journey that will go in a straight line. It is a continuous, ever-changing journey, and what your colleagues feel like now may not be what they feel like in 6 months' time, which is why it's really important to keep talking to your colleagues, keep actively listening to what they tell you, continually reassess your progress, and be open to reworking what you're doing, even if that means rolling back on an idea that you thought might be successful. And so to effect real, sustainable, long-term change, we must be willing to be open and honest of our successes, but also of our challenges and the issues that we are trying to fix. So that's all from me, and thank you for listening, and please send any questions into the chat box that you might have. Thank you.
Carrie, I think you're handing over to me now. So my name is Nicola Armstrong, and I am here today on behalf of Enable, our Danske Disability Network. Enable was first launched in 2019. We are proud to be our first diversity and inclusion network for Danske Bank, which is fantastic. We have our aim to drive awareness and change around disability with a view to attracting, developing and supporting disabled people within our community. We are made up with a huge network of really passionate colleagues and headed up by a steering committee, which is split into several work streams that then focus on working towards different achievements on different topics. You can see our charter there on the screen. Our charter is to make more possible for both our current and prospective colleagues by promoting inclusion and enabling colleagues with disabilities to fulfil their full potential in the workplace. We will promote wider social inclusion and enable through delivery of our priorities and the fact that disabilities need to be seen. We have a huge focus on education and awareness, training and support to colleagues and people leaders, because without training and support, there will be no change, and actively attracting disabled people to Danske via a fully accessible and inclusive recruitment process. I could just move on to the next slide. Thank you very much. As I say, our focus is around recruiting, developing and supporting our people Our achievements in 2021, they were many and varied, and I think probably the one that I am proudest of is around how we have made steps to attract disabled people to work with Danske Bank. We have a lot more work to do on this topic, but where we were massively successful was within our work with some of our external stakeholders. And in 2021, we had a 12-week work placement through Employ Autism, through which we were able to employ a student at Queen's, an IT student from Queen's called David, and he was placed in our robotics department. And during the 12 weeks that he was here, he was with us, he massively exceeded everybody's expectations and built a robot from scratch for one of our departments. And that was a massive achievement for him, and we learned so much from David as well. We have also linked in with Stepping Stones, and we currently have 2 6-month paid placements for 2 individuals, a girl called Kimberly and a fella called Lewis. And Kimberly is working in our mortgage completion support team and supporting them in a huge amount of work that goes through that department. And Lewis is placed in our branch in Lisburn, and he is customer facing and providing fantastic customer service to a lot of our customers on a daily basis. And both those guys are enjoying themselves and doing absolutely fantastic. We have focused in 2021 on developing our people. So there was disability awareness and training provided to the managers and team leaders in the departments which our placements have been placed in, and the feedback on that was absolutely fantastic. The guys learned so much from that they're able to use to support their colleagues. We're focusing on supporting our people, and we have what we call our Enable Hub, and the Enable Hub is part of our HR website, and it is a website where our colleagues can go should they find themselves facing a disability, should they find themselves having to care for somebody with a disability. There is a wealth of information there on support groups, charities, and all sorts of information on help that is available. We also have a range of colleague stories and case studies, and these are both in written form and in video. These were shared by some extremely brave colleagues and based on their personal experiences. So they cover topics from Crohn's disease to caring for somebody with Down syndrome, working in Danske Bank with multiple sclerosis, mental illness and learning difficulties as well. So I'm exceedingly proud of the colleagues that shared their stories, because so many people have benefited from those as well. Whenever somebody is disabled, it can be a very, very lonely position to be in. And I think just knowing that there are other people in the same position is hugely beneficial. And 2021, I am hugely proud of the work that we have done in Enable and the contribution towards our silver diversity mark, which we've maintained for the 2nd year running now, which is fantastic. And absolutely everybody deserves recognition for that. Just move on to the next slide. Thank you. So we have huge plans for 2022. In 2021, we achieved Disability Confident Level 1, part of the government's Disability Confident Employer Scheme. And in Level 2, we have targeted ourselves with achieving Level 2. And we will do that by continuing to expand on the recruitment, development and support of our people. We are going to turn our attention to actively attracting disabled people to Danske via a fully accessible and inclusive recruitment process. And that is going to include reviewing the recruitment processes we have in place, learning from other employers and developing our own recruitment processes to make ourselves as accessible as possible for disabled people. We are going to continue to develop our people, and rather than just focusing on our people leaders that require the support because they maybe have disabled people within their teams, we are going to focus right the way through our colleague journey from induction and right throughout our careers with Danske Bank. we will support our people. We hugely value, and we are really, really keen to listen to feedback from our disabled staff, and we're going to look into focus groups to enable us to do that. And we will take action, of course, from that feedback and how to improve the support that we give to our people within Danske Bank. Kerry is going to be launching our workplace adjustments policy, which is going to be hugely valuable to the disabled people that work for Danske at the moment, and to have that in place for whenever we attract a broader range of disabled people will be fantastic support to have in place for them as well. We will continue to promote a culture of being disability confident, and we will continue in our collaboration with our other Danske diversity and inclusion networks. So as I said, Enable is the original, and I like to argue the best DNI network that Danske have, but we also have our colleagues in our Rainbow network, our gender network Origins, and through education and via events, we will work together to promote diversity and inclusion within Danske Bank. So thank you. That's me.
Hi, I think I'm up next. Hi there, everybody. My name is Siobhan Mckenna, and my thanks to everybody for inviting me here today. It was fascinating to hear what Danske Bank are up to. There's some really, really good stuff in there, so thank you for that. As I said, my name is Siobhan Mckenna, and I am the head of Equality, Diversity and Inclusion at the Public Appointments Service. And I'm just going to talk to you today about some of the work that we've done over the last year. We launched our ED&I strategy this month last year. So just bear with me and I will pop it up on the screen, hopefully. Let me know, can you see that? Just need to go to slideshow. Now, I'm hoping everybody can see that.
Can see it. Just needs to go on slideshow.
Oh, sorry. Yeah, I did it again. This one there. How about that?
That's it. Thank you.
Yeah, brilliant. Okay, so as I was saying, yes, so I've been in post about a year, and as was mentioned earlier, I spent 20 years in London prior to that, working in the international development sector, and then in the public sector, 12 years in the in City Hall for various mayors of London. And during my time there, I held various posts around education and youth. My last role was in London's Violence Reduction Unit. I was also senior social policy advisor to the mayor and his deputies. I was gender equality lead during my time there as well, and developed a sponsorship program to increase the number of women in senior management positions in City Hall. And we managed to close our gender pay gap from about 12% to less than 1% in about 4 years through programs like that. So that is kind of how I ended up in the current role that I'm in. And as I mentioned, we launched our ED&I strategy there last year. So just, I'll move on there, just one sec. Just for those of you who are familiar with the Public Appointments Service, we are the centralised recruiter for the civil and public sector in Ireland. And so what does that involve? Well, we provide recruitment advice and services to 18 government departments, large parts of the health service, large parts of An Garda Síochána, local government, many state boards, about 25%, and then over about 150 other public bodies in that space. So, and just to give you an idea of the scale of the public sector workforce in Ireland, you can see that civil services there at around 44,000 staff. The largest are education and health, and the overall sector is about 350,000, which is about 50% of our labour force. And so just to give you an idea of the scale of recruitment that we do, the Public Appointments Service, in 2020, we ran 358 campaigns. We processed over 85,000 applications. We tested, we held about 95,000 tests, and those all ended up in about 5,000 replacements across vacancies filled across the civil and public sector. So it's large scale recruitment. And just a quick look at what diversity in Irish society and what diversity in the Irish civil service looks like at the moment. 54% of us are male, 46 female, 83 of us are Irish born, 17% born elsewhere, 13% of us have a disability, and somewhere between 5 to 10% of us identify as a member of the LGBTQ community. The diversity in the Irish civil service does not reflect that. You can see there that most of our Secretary General, 72% are male, whereas only 28% are female. 97% of us are Irish born, which means only about 3% of us come from somewhere else. About 5% of us have a declared disability. And we don't currently collect data on LGBT, so we have no comparator for that. So we have a bit of work to do, I guess, when it comes to ensuring that the Irish civil and public sector reflects a very modern and changing Ireland. It's evolved in the 20 years that I was out of it, let me tell you. And so we are doing our best to support that work. And so how are we doing that? Well, and in our mission, it is quite clear that ED&I is aligned with our overall corporate strategy. And out of that strategy came our first equality, diversity and inclusion strategy, which we launched last March. We identified 3 key areas for our first strategy. The first change area was around greater knowledge and understanding of diversity and recruitment in the Irish public sector. Change area 2 was focusing more on our recruitment and selection processes and procedures and policies, and encouraging and enabling access for all candidates, irrespective of background, who are interested in a career in the civil and public sector. And then the third area, because of our centralized role, we have a trusted partner role. A lot of people come to us for advice and guidance, obviously on recruitment and selection, but increasingly on ED&I in the workplace. And so we're really keen to model best practice in our own organization. We are also an employer. We don't just do recruitment for other people. And so we're really keen to make sure that we have our own house in order, and that we test things, and that we share best practice with our partners, our stakeholders and our clients. Our strategy runs until December 2023, and we've outlined where we want to be by then. So obviously we want to increase our knowledge about the recruitment landscape, and that will help us then increase our targeted, informed outreach and engagement with communities that are currently underrepresented in the civil and public sector. We want better recruitment and selection processes. We want to remove unintentional barriers, invisible barriers, so that no group or individual faces any unintended barriers as they progress both into the service and then through it. And then that final area is I talked about modeling best practice in our own culture. And we're really keen to raise the profile of ED&I across the whole civil service and the public sector. So that is where we hope to be by December 2023. And just to give you a brief idea of some of the work that's underway in that area. And just before I go into that, if I could just say, we set up an ED&I project board internally in the Public Appointment Service, and it consists of all our senior heads of services. Our CEO attends, but we have an external chair, Salome, and she is one of the human rights commissioners. She also runs a migrant women's organization, and she brings that external kind of lived experience with her into the board, and helps us and guides us in our work, and makes sure that we are grounded in the reality of it. And so the idea behind the project board is obviously to drive implementation around the ED&I strategy, but also to evaluate and monitor the impact of our ED&I actions. We obviously, because of the nature of our public sector organization, we have various obligations under national strategies and things like that, be it disability, a migrant strategy, women and girls, things like that. So, the board keeps an eye and makes sure that we are meeting our obligations under those strategies. We are the nature of the board, and the cross-organizational nature of the board means that we're hoping to embed ED&I across all parts of the public appointment service. Some areas it's immediately apparent where ED&I is key, but in less it's not. So we are working on that, and that's why we have everyone around the table having these conversations and driving this work. We also need the board to inform and challenge the organization around this area, and again, to ensure accountability and to monitor our progress, both internally and externally. And so some of the work that we're doing under Change Area 1, which is that better knowledge and understanding of the Irish public sector, we are working on a project with the ERSI at the moment. We need much better data. We up until this point, I don't know that we had data, or rather, as it turns out, we were sitting on a mountain of data, but we hadn't analysed it and organised it, and we couldn't get the knowledge and insights that a large body of data like that would give. We want everything that we do to be data driven. So we're working with the ERSI at the moment. About 80,000 people, as you saw earlier, apply to through public appointment service to join the civil and public sector. So as it turns out, we have a lot of data. We have very high declaration rates as well. They're kind of up in the 80s and 90s for everything for gender, ethnicity, LGBT. So we know that the data that we have is robust and representative. And so we are working towards developing an equality monitoring dashboard with our partners, ERSI. And so that we're hoping that it will give us insights and a methodology for how we manage our own data, but also then as a blueprint for wider civil service and public sector organisations to follow on. We ran a pilot last November with Inclusio, which is a gamified software tool, and it gathers data both on the demographics of your organisation, but also around those key inclusion markers, belonging, inclusivity, sentiment, things like that. We ran a pilot for about a month, and it's like an app, and it's on your phone, and it's all very 2.0 or 3.0, I guess, this stage. And the idea is that you go on for 2 or 3 minutes a day, and you answer a couple of questions about your profile, you answer a couple of questions about ED&I. There's a whole learning element to it as well. So, and that is by an organisation called Inclusio, which is a spin-off out of DCU. So it was great to work with an Irish team on such cutting edge engagement tool. And we had about a 75% engagement rate with our staff. They really liked it. And we got really useful data from it. For example, it turns out that 17% or 14% of our staff are neurodiverse, 12% identify as LGBT, 75% identified as coming from a working class background. We didn't have those 3 points of data before we ran this pilot. So it also gave us lots of feedback around that sense of belonging. 40% of our staff in PASS have started in the last 2 years. So we were interested to see how belonging felt for those 40% that had come into the organisation but were still working in their bedroom or their living room. So it was a really interesting pilot, and we're looking at how we can take that further and keep our staff engaged in both learning about ED&I and raising issues with us through this forum so that we can address them. And then we're doing quite a bit of outreach and engagement, both to underrepresented groups and raising awareness around public jobs. The evidence tells us that you're more likely to apply for a public sector or civil service job if you have a public sector or a civil servant in your family. If it's not on your radar, it may never cross your mind as you're trying to figure out what you do as you leave school or college. So we spend a lot of time at recruitment fairs and community events, and we're hoping to increase that. And we are about to launch a civil service-wide HR network, which is going to focus on attracting diverse candidates and how we can do that better. So that's just some of the work that we're doing under Change Area 1. Under Change Area 2, which is more around our processes and things, we're partnering with Deloitte at the moment. They're doing a full ED&I diagnostic review of both our internal processes as an employer, but also as our external processor as that central recruiter for the civil and public sector. So that's just kicking off at the moment. So we should have a good idea in the next couple of months of what's working well and what isn't working well. Again, it's having that evidence base so that we can target our activities in the right place. Our assessment services unit are also doing an ED&I review as well. Our assessment services unit are the ones that set all the tests for civil service general grades and things like that. So they want to make sure that these assessments are equitable, not just equal, but equitable, and that we're not excluding anybody or making it or putting unnecessary barriers up for people through the assessment process. We've done a lot of work in the last year or two around reasonable accommodations and exploring the disabled candidate's journey through our processes. We did a lot of fact finding and evidence gathering in 19 and 20, and we ended up with a roadmap with about 20 plus recommendations across 5 themes everything from communication to processes to various programs we want to support disabled candidates. And so we're working through those, and we're in the implementation phase there. And then finally on that, we obviously are really keen. The evidence again tells us that the greater interview, or the greater diversity you have in interview boards, the better candidate you're going to get. And so there is a lack of diversity around the interview boards that we use for these panel competitions and stuff. So we're looking at ways where we can put a process in place to attract more people who are interested in sitting on these boards for us, that come from a broader background, a broader skill set. It's currently largely retired civil servants who sit on these boards for us at the moment. So we're trying to widen that out and just increase the board diversity for our candidates to come through our process. And then finally, in change area 3, we are trying to model best practice, as I was saying, and we have a couple of alternative pathways, and we'd say, or inclusive pathways in. So at the moment, there's only one way into the Irish civil service, and that's through our organisation and through our various processes. You can only apply for a full-time job, etc., etc. There's not much flexibility in the system at the moment. So this, the Oroccus work learning program is a work learning program for people with intellectual disabilities. They work 2.5 days a week, but prior to that, they do a 9-month placement, so they get familiar with the job and the role. They're supported in their jobs by a job coach, who will come in and also work with the hiring managers and employers and carve out a role for these candidates to do in the 2.5 days that they're working. We at the moment we've just put a panel together for cohort 2, and so we're learning as we go, because that's quite a mold breaker for the civil service, both the part-time approach and the different approach to getting people in, as in it's a work learning as opposed to an interview and assessment. They do interviews, etc., during the process, but it's just a different approach to getting people in. It's a more inclusive approach. The Willing Able Mentoring Program, we've been partnering with AHEAD, which is a disability support organization, and they run a 6-month work placement, and they usually take on about 60 or 70, and they split them across the public and the civil service in Ireland. And so that it's been running for about 18 years, and up until this year, it's always been fixed term, only 6 months in, and then you're out. But we've been working with colleagues in AHEAD and across the Department for Expenditure and Public Reform to turn that into a permanent pathway for the people who successfully complete their work placement. So that is another route in for people with disabilities that is outside of the norm, I suppose. It's comparable, it's just much more inclusive. And we get better candidates because the process gives them a chance to shine better, I suppose. And finally, we joined Open Doors there, which is an organisation that helps the most marginalised and furthest away from the labour market get into work. So we are working with them around our thinking for more inclusive pathways for other representative groups. We're conscious that those 2 programs support disabled people, but we also need to look at those migrant backgrounds or other groups. Traveller communities as well is another likely beneficiary of these kind of models. Consultations and as I mentioned, the national strategies, and we're actively involved in those, and there's various action points that we have in various action plans. And again, I mentioned the range of events that we've been doing with stakeholders, partners, and clients. Very similar to this, hearing what other people are doing, sharing what we're doing, and trying to learn from across sectors and organizations in this space. We are conscious as well that we need to upskill our own staff in this area. A lot of our staff are in very public-facing jobs. So we want to fully equip them to be able to work in this environment and in a more inclusive recruitment processes and policies. So we have a series of events, and we get speakers to come in and talk to us. We had Senator Eileen Flynn in last year talking about her experience as a member of the traveller community and as a senator. ERSI are in a couple of times giving us updates on their latest reports and research that's relevant to us. ESB have a great LGBT program, Be Me, and they came in and talked to us about it as well. We did a collaborative event with our colleagues in the Department of Foreign Affairs last summer to mark Africa Day, where we had a recruitment event for Irish of African descent, and all sorts of things. So we, and the aim of all of this is to understand and support our clients through these kind of events, invite them along, turn up at their events, and work with recruiter networks and develop a more collaborative approach to attracting people into the civil and public sector in Ireland. And just to flag, we also, as I mentioned earlier, we manage about 25% of state board appointments. And there's a quick snapshot there of some of the data around state boards. And we do about 65 campaigns a year, I think. There's about 14, somewhere between 14 and 20 applicants for per vacancy. We've done quite well recently with gender equality, and it's started to balance out across the 25% that we do. We have more work to do around disability and those from diverse backgrounds. This data, by the way, is from 2021, and just to flag that we've launched a new state board, I think it was just last month. So some of you will be involved with state boards or may want to be on a state board at some point in the future. So I'd encourage you to stop by and check it out. Lots of useful information on there, and it's apparently a much more user-friendly process now as well. So this is my last slide, just a few thoughts after being a year back in the ED&I space and a year home in Ireland. It's quite clear that you can't do this kind of work without having some kind of vision, a plan, or a strategy. Like any journey, you need a map to get you there. I can't overstate the importance of inclusive leadership. People need to lead from the front in this area. The moral, the legal, the business case has been made. I would argue that we don't need to keep making it, but it's just my own personal opinion. ED&I, it's very clear over the last 2 years as well, reflects and is impacted by wider society. If it wasn't clear before, it certainly is now. And also, I'm really positive that Ireland, that's a great opportunity for Ireland to be best in class in and around this space. We need to find our own cultural responses to this. We don't, have a history of colonialism. We don't have a history of slavery. We don't have that baggage. We need to find our own way through this that is culturally appropriate for us. But I think there's a real chance for us to lead. And that pilot that I referenced earlier around inclusio and stuff, that's a really good example of Ireland leading the way in this. And again, this area is a marathon and it's not a sprint. None of this is going to happen overnight. None of it is quick fix. You're talking about winning hearts and minds in some places. In other places, you're talking about structural change. All of those things take time. And then just some of the key challenges. Data. There's no data, you have no evidence base, and it's very hard to make the right decisions if you don't have the evidence to tell you what needs to be done. There is still a bit of work to do around making ED&I relevant to everyone. I think one of the other presenters mentioned that earlier. ED&I is relevant for everyone, despite what people may think. So there is a narrative shift around there, I think. Really key that we all avoid that performative ED&I. I think that can undermine any other good stuff that you're doing. Really important to set key measurables to drive progress. And again, that goes back to data. If you don't have a baseline, it's very hard to measure progress from. Also, acknowledging kind of personal and organizational biases. I work in the civil service. It's a culture that I was very unfamiliar with when I first started, and it's been a steep learning curve. But it's reinforced how important the culture is to making progress in this and acknowledging the blind spots, and the way we've always done things may not be the way that we should do them in the future. I mentioned before, we need to find culturally appropriate solutions. I hear language like BAME coming in, people of colour, both borrowed from the UK and American stuff. And I think Ireland needs to find its own language and way of communication around this issue. And again, it's a marathon and not a sprint. It's one of the harder things I think in the ED&I space is maintaining attention and interest and budgets and all that, because it is, as I said earlier, it is a marathon. It's not going to stop anytime soon. It will hopefully get easier as we progress along our journey, but maintaining momentum can be a challenge in this space. And so that's it for me. Thank you very much for your attention. And yeah, I'll hand you back to the panel.
Okay, afternoon everyone. Thanks so much, Siobhan, for that and the overview. So my name's Jill Michael, if you missed the introductions at the start, and I work at NL Goodbody. I'm head of talent at NI there, and I'm here from a perspective of being a Silver Diversity Mark award holder, which we're very, very proud of. So my role today is to tell you a little bit more about us and where our journey started. So in terms of NL Goodbody, if you don't know who we are, we're a leading corporate law firm. Our head office is in Dublin, but I'm here very much from the Belfast perspective, as I'm sure you know from the accent. We advise domestic and international businesses on their activities throughout Northern Ireland, and a top tier firm in that. We started our Belfast office in 2007. In 2009, we were 10 employees and colleagues, and now up to 125. Our age distribution, I would say, is quite young, but then maybe from celebrating a 40th birthday quite recently, my perspective is a bit warped in that. But we have a young dynamic in our firm. In terms of our gender split, you can see we have 62% of our workforce are female and 38% are male. Then in terms of our lawyers, we have a 50-50, pretty much a 50-50 split there. And then with our partners, which would be our leadership team, you can see that it's 28% female and 72% male. And that's something that clearly we're working on. Moving on to the next slide then, why diversity, Mark? Well, for us, sorry, can you see that? Just moving on. So why diversity, Mark? Well, for us, it started with Christine White. And we had heard Christine speak at the initial stages of diversity, Mark, when it was the gender diversity mark at that point, at a number of events, and we were keen to be part of what she was talking about. We had the strength of a Dublin office who were driving initiatives in DNI, and I had a group of partners who were really keen to address DNI in our workforce, and the diversity mark were talking about something that just seemed a good place for us to concentrate our efforts. From our perspective, it was the mark of progress that really attracted us. So it was the recognition that it wasn't an award for those who had absolutely made it. It was actually the design and the ethos of it to keep pushing individuals to strive for more and to show a continuance of effort and evidence in relation to diversity, which was really attractive to us. Then for us, there was the public declaration for us to say that as Team ALG, that we were concentrated on this as an effort in diversity and inclusion. We're in a competitive talent and client market. And so for us, it seemed like a no-brainer that we made a commitment to our colleagues and our clients in the current and the future. And that's why we started on this journey. And then the fact that it was an award body, for us, we're very goal-driven organization, and the design and structure of the diversity mark was very attractive in that we could see the momentum that it was building, and that in turn was very attractive to us because of what we wanted to achieve in our own D&I journey, but also the prestigiousness and the professionalism of the actual award. So where we started where everyone does, which is bronze. And we were really keen to look at 3 different areas. So if you don't know the structure of the diversity mark, we had to set 3 areas which would look across gender for us. And that was for us talent mapping process, culture strategy, and then better integration for support of maternity returners, individuals going off on maternity and also returning. The context for us again was that we had a really well vision strategy from our Dublin office. There were clear pillars of focus, and we were keen to consider specifically what we needed in an NI context. The talent mapping process, that was new to us in NL Goodbody, and it was something that we were looking at as a strategic workforce planning tool. So we trained our leaders on that, enabled high-level overview of our workforce, and then we were able to look at the success planning. So what we wanted to achieve, could we actually deliver it with the pool of individuals that we had? And that led us on to recruitment needs and fundamental L&D activities. And then we looked at our culture strategy. So we had been operating since 2007. Our culture was formed on collaboration, and we wanted to look across that through our values and our surveys to see how that had shifted, if it still was our culture, and how that would be impacted in terms of us ensuring it was inclusive and diverse, and that all genders could thrive in that environment. So that was something that we focused on as well. And then, as I said, maternity. We had carried out focus groups through our culture strategy, and the interesting piece that we found was that individuals were saying, which we know is across so many industries, the impact on career when starting a family. But the interesting piece for us was that when we carried out those surveys, individuals were saying actually those pressures were coming from a societal impact rather than internal. And so that was a more challenging thing for us to impact and to look at, and that became a focus in our area. And we started to build our strategy out there. We were awarded the bronze in August 2019, which gave us such a buzz. And the great thing about the structure of this is that we then had to submit in a year's time to show the progress that we were making through the targets that we had set. And that worked really well for us. Then we decided to embark upon our silver journey. And again, this was something that was just driven for us that we wanted to do. So we had to add in a number of other areas. We actually kept on our 3 gender targets that we've been looked at. We felt that we had only just scratched the surface of those, and there was so much more that we could achieve there and wanted to achieve through the diversity mark. So we did the talent mapping and introduced it, but actually when it came to our silver, it was then about embedding that and making it a core annual process and seeing the actions and the visions coming out of that. And again, with the culture strategy, short term, it definitely wasn't a short term feature. And so we had looked at it and there was more work to be done. One of the outputs of that was embedding diversity and inclusion principles as part of our strategy. And they were be kind, be curious, be brave, and be accountable. And we use them in everyday interactions in our firm. And then maternity, again, that wasn't one that we could just leave. We were so keen to make it clear to individuals internally and externally that we wanted to do more to implement awareness around the challenges around maternity when you're coming back from a career to a career, and changing the script and delivering really practical outputs so that there was no negative impact on people in that. And then our additional areas of focus were disability and social mobility. And again, there we started working with our progress with the diversity mark through to the silver in terms of showing what we were doing there. And there were things like education, accessibility. We delivered sign language courses prior to Rose being that amazing feature on Strictly Come Dancing. And what was really enlightening in some of those things that we implemented was Anthony Sinclair was our teacher, and the deaf awareness courses that he raised with us as well that ran alongside the sign language course. So it was very much about educating as much as learning new skills in order to make our workforce more inclusive. And then in the social mobility space, that was really driven for us as one of our targets by the phrase, which I'm sure you've all heard, talent is everywhere, opportunity is not. And ourselves as a law firm, that can often be referred to in the legal world, it's quite hard to get into from various different socioeconomic backgrounds, and that has been widely talked about. And we were keen to change the script there. So that was one of our targets that we're still working on and still keen to work on. In terms of impact and the diversity mark, what can I say? Well, we said that we started with Christine, and we've been continuing that journey with Nuala and with Emma, and who have been so supportive with us. We found that it has absolutely pushed the boundaries of what we wanted to achieve. Knowing that you're working towards something, I cannot emphasize how positive that has been, and being part of that diversity mark. We have pushed the boundaries beyond probably what we ever would have wanted to do. Knowing that you're working towards something, that you're continually assessed on it, and that we are silver diversity holders, and that we're ambassadors of that accreditation. And that's important for us externally and internally, that we continue to be those ambassadors and holders of those awards, and continue to be progressing. One thing that we recognized really early in our diversity journey, and something that I would advise people to do, is that introducing external partnerships. So we learned quite early we can't do this on our own. There was some major factors that we were working with in terms of our maternity individuals telling us about the societal factors which were a feature in terms of their career progression. And that was something that was challenging to look at. So we introduced external partnerships, and you may, if you follow us on any of the social media platforms, will have seen launching our partnership with Platform 55 and Aspiring Partners and Anthony Sinclair, as I talked about as well, through deaf awareness courses and sign language courses. And those have been fundamental to our journey. We learned that we couldn't do it alone, and we actually need some real expert help. And that probably has been accelerated and driven through our partnership with the Diversity Mark. And then the benefits, of which there are far too many to mention on this call, but I guess as a snapshot, and obviously anyone can ask us afterwards in any of the questions, there was benefits to our business, to our people and our clients, and we see that on a daily basis. And hand on heart can say that absolutely the Diversity Mark journey has driven our D&I strategy, so much so that we're having our first D&I strategy away day, where we're all getting away from the office as a committee to really drive that strategy even further, to get to a place that actually we don't use the phrase D&I strategy anymore, that it just is strategy. The opportunities that the Diversity Mark has given to us through the support and the networks that have been opened up through other industries, and we learned so much from other industries in our journey as well, it is exponential, to be honest. We found Diversity Mark have been a real partner with us in this journey. And as I said, it started with Christine and continues with Nuala and Emma in terms of the journey that we're going through. The point to note is definitely, yes, we are silver Diversity Mark holders, but quite clearly we're not done yet. We have still so much more to do, and it is that mark of progress that we find so attractive, that we're continuing to improve, and actually then the impact of that across our industry and across NI as a whole and beyond now with the reach of Diversity Mark is so important. Next for us, I guess, is gold, which will be an intense process and rigorous, and rightly so. And that's the benefit of the Diversity Mark as well, in that it is absolutely robust in terms of its assessment. And certainly we would definitely recommend it for anyone starting their D&I journey, and the impact that it has had on our organisation as a whole. I know that now we're going to move on to questions, but I would say that I act as a buddy in the Diversity Mark, and if anyone would like to talk to, I'm sure, Danske Bank or myself around our journey and how that has all transpired, more than happy to do that off this call, as well as any questions that might come. But thank you for the opportunity to just talk about our journey and show you the progress that we've made and the impact it's had on our business.
Fantastic, Jill, Siobhan, Jenny, Nicola and Kerry, for sharing so much information, not only about your journey with Diversity Mark, but also with your journey with diversity and inclusion in the workplace, and some really wonderful examples of leadership and challenge and innovation and sharing and learning together. I think that there's a lot of takeaways there. I'm going to, being conscious of time, and also if anybody in the audience wants to ask a question, take advantage right now. But I want to jump into the first question. I'm going to go back to you, Jill, because I know you have a hard stop, and I really just want to ask from the outset, if there's an organization here, whether it's a small, medium or large, what do you think is the best first steps to getting started on their D&I journey? And you don't have to say sign up to Diversity Mark, but internally, Siobhan mentioned about the business case, and we shouldn't have to continually talk about the business case. It's morally right, it's good. But really, when it comes to someone who's a leader in an organization, who's passionate about getting started with D&I and feels the company or the organization needs it, what's the best first steps that they could take in order to get the show on the road?
Yeah, I probably would say partner with someone like Diversity Mark, and it's not a shameless plug at all, because that's definitely been our experience. I mean, DNI has been in our strategy, since the outset, at NL Goodbody, and we had a lot to work off in terms of our Dublin office and the strategies that they were running, and that was really powerful for us. But actually seeing the support that Diversity Mark can make, actually having gone through the process now, and in hindsight, sometimes we try to run before we walk, and there's maybe things I would have done differently, actually, now being part of Diversity Mark, and seeing the networks that they can open up and the people that you can speak to who have been in that journey. You've seen Danske Bank and the amazing work they're doing there, and that network is open to you as a Diversity Mark joiner, and you can join before actually going through your progress and towards the chartership. So I would say definitely seek advice and seek support. You need to have leadership buy-in. I mean, you've heard that throughout, and thankfully in ANL Goodbody that was absolutely there in spades and continues to be. But you need to have that advocate, and you need to have it led from the top. It isn't an HR strategy, and I'm so glad that we're moving on from that, which it was for quite some time. I'm so glad that now businesses in Northern Ireland are recognising that this is integral to their strategy and it's not an appendage. So my advice would be partner with someone like yourselves to do that first step.
Okay, thank you. And I suppose the fact that now we are growing outside of just NI, obviously that's part of our origin story. We have many signatories across the rest of Ireland and the UK. Siobhan, I'm going to jump to you because you mentioned something that's really it's something that I have noticed as well in all my different hats that I've played with Lean In. So I brought the Lean In movement, so to speak, here to NI, then the rest of Ireland. And we operated off a lot of the information and research that was done on a global stage, which was mostly Lean In McKinsey, and it's very focused on women in the workplace in America. However, when there's lack of evidence and lack of data and lack of similar reports, you use it and you tweak it. But you mentioned something really interesting there about the cultural difference. So we know UK and Ireland, yes, it's a region. There's a lot of things that are similar, but as you said, minority groupings in the UK, especially when it comes to race, are referenced differently than in the Republic of Ireland. The journeys are different. And even if we look at Northern Ireland, right, we have our own challenges and our own biases. So that data piece and that monitoring piece, I'd really love to, if you can share some insights there on what you think we need to do collectively. But you seem to be, you're the expert here. You have a lot of experience across the different jurisdictions. And if you could share a little bit about that, the data, its importance, and to help those inclusive pathways, really,
Yeah, well, there's a lot of external drivers as well in Ireland at the moment, like gender pay gap reporting is now law. So all of these organizations who have, I think, 200 employees or more have to produce a gender pay gap report. So if you're going to go out and gather that data, why wouldn't you gather the data on other groups in your organization? As I was leaving City Hall in last February, we had released for the second year our ethnicity pay gap data, and we were looking at our disability pay gap data. They're all the logical next step. It's only one indicator of how groups are getting on in the workforce, but it's a pretty good indicator, and it can give you an evidence base for the arguments you may instinctively know, but you have got to convince senior managers, people, budget holders, things like that. So, and kind of that mecca of data is then that intersectional data, where you can see how a woman with a disability and a migrant background is getting on, or how a gay man with a disability, so it's, but again, that's the evidence base, and that is, and I keep saying to people, look, yeah, we're gathering all this data, and then we need to do something with it.
Yeah,
like it's not an act in itself to gather the data.
Yeah.
And we have a lot of partners, like a lot of the data that we would gather is for Garda Síochána or is for HSC. So it's not solely our data, and we need to be careful how we manage anything that comes out of the data that we find. That it's a sensitive issue. I don't think our current data project with the ERSI is going to be full of surprises by any stretch. I think it's going to confirm what we already know.
Yeah.
And the data that I showed around civil diversity in the civil service, that was cobbled together from various sources. That's not civil service data. We need that data so that we can benchmark ourselves and track progress.
Yeah.
And you know, it is, and we were really surprised when we started looking at our data how high those declaration rates were, and they're all voluntary.
Okay.
None of it is mandatory. As people set up profiles to apply for jobs, they can tick those boxes or not. And so clearly people are happy enough and are beginning to understand why people are collecting this data to benefit them in the long run, the processes, the policies that will make up their working life.
Yeah.
So that was quite positive for us as well. Just on the cultural things, because I'm watching the clock tick down here.
We could talk all day.
Yeah, believe me, I could. Ask my husband. I just, because I'm back new in the country, I suppose. I was born and raised here, and the Ireland that I left in 2001 was markedly different to the Ireland that I came back to in 2021, largely for the better, you know. But we are now grappling with other countries who've had a more diverse population for longer across the board. So that piece where we can be best in class, I'm also hoping we can learn from the mistakes that other people have made along the way. There's no reason for us to go down that route again. Like, I work very closely with An Garda Síochána, and I'm like, look, the Met Police have a tough job. They haven't got everything right. They're community policing. You know, you need to get it right. You need a community police force that represents the community they're policing. I don't need to tell people in Northern Ireland that. It's those kinds of, you know. So that's what I mean by Ireland is a small country. We need to find the answers to our own solutions. And ED&I is part of the wider societal conversation about the type of society that we want to have. The workplace is just one element of it. So that was just my plea. Is I just kept hearing BAME and people of color everywhere, and I was like, hang on, what's the Irish for BAME? You know.
Exactly. Yeah. Okay. No, that's brilliant. And also mentioned about the inclusive pathways into the, that again is also something that is coming up a lot when we consider the intersectionality when we talk about DNI. Do you want to speak a little bit to that, and then we can see if there's any questions in the chat box before we move to Danska and then wrap up?
Sure, yeah. As I was saying, you know, it's quite a rigid system, and all civil services are like this. The Irish civil service is no better or worse than the British one or the American one or whatever. But they are big, they're huge. It's very hard to make structural changes in there. But it is at the same time, as we were saying to someone the other day, it's the only sector where you can't work part-time.
Yeah.
Everywhere else you can work part-time, flexible time, job sharing, all of that. So. And if COVID has taught us anything, is that none of us are going back into an office for 5 days a week. And so that whole flexible hybrid now is the opportunity to bring that kind of change into the civil service. So these programs are one that we are trying to develop that will, in this particular instance, help disabled people. But I think it would work for traveller communities as well. There's big education gaps in the traveller community. And one way to close that is in-work learning. Get them in, get them to prove themselves, show them how they do it, and then give them a pathway to a permanent job.
Yeah.
Migrant communities have a different set of structural barriers. Our eligibility criteria are quite restrictive. So, and that is a structural barrier. If you don't have a stamp 4 visa and you're not married to an EEA citizen or the parent of or the child of, you can't join the Irish civil service. And 17% of us are born somewhere else. So something there has, so it's about identifying those actual barriers and trying to remove them. But I'll stop there because I know you want to bring Danska in. Sorry,
no, Siobhan, I think we will have a follow-up there, and I'm sure we'll be in touch after this. But I think that there's so much great learnings, you know, your experience, you know, in City Hall, but also then coming back to a different Ireland, as you say, and we're all collectively can make a difference. And I think that's probably what we need to see, more collaboration across the board. I am going to jump over to Danske Bank. I know we have about 6 minutes left, and I really would love the team there to share some key takeaways for the audience today. So I'm going to call on you, Jenny.
Hi, Nuala.
Hi, that time has gone quickly, hasn't it? So I'm really keen to get some of your key takeaways today, Jenny. And the biggest one really would be, are there any examples of the colleagues outcomes that colleagues have had, you know, top of mind that you could share as the impact, because obviously this is all about the impact on the individual in the workplace.
Yeah, that's it. I think for me, Nuala, actually, it's hearing the lived experiences of colleagues. So I'm very keen that, you know, Danske Bank as a business is in listening mode, and we understand exactly what it is our colleagues are asking of us, expecting of us, but going out into our colleague communities and having those conversations. So over the past couple of weeks, I've been doing that across our branch network, across our customer direct network. And in fact, those conversations have further informed some of the policy work that I'm keen to do and our team's keen to do then over the course of the, you know, the next year and 24 months. So for me, it's the lived experiences and how they inform our position. And I think also coming from an employment law background, it's very easy to see, you know, policy and strategy as just, you know, paper documents. And I really want to get away from that. I want our employment policies to be living documents at Danske, that people feel that they can take, lift, read and have applicability to their lives. And again, back to the moments that matter piece. So it's having policies that work and are adaptable and are fluid as much as anything else.
That's brilliant, Jenny. And I'm just conscious we have a few minutes left. So I really want to wrap up now and thank everybody for being involved with today's event. I think some of the key messages that have come across are really about everyone starting from a different position. Everybody's journey is different. The importance of leadership and buy-in from leadership, whether we like it or not, we have to put a case forward to support our D&I efforts. A big piece also is about that partnership piece. I think that's so important, is to find partners with which you can truly partner to make things better and to represent that your staff and your employees. To recap on diversity, Mark, and our role in today and our role in general, it's really to support the workplace and wider society to build a more diverse and inclusive one. And yes, most of our organizations are the workplace. We feel that this is somewhere where there's an interest post-pandemic. And unfortunately, you know, we've 130 years to get to true gender equality in the workplace, right? It kind of went back an extra decade further to the pandemic. So let's not be disheartened. Let's not be overwhelmed with some of the great organizations and examples here that we've heard about getting started in those journeys, but try to break it down to our own individual roles, our own individual companies, resources, and reach out to people who have already been there and done that on the journey ahead of you. Learn from their trials and tribulations and have candid conversations. And we'd love to be able to facilitate that for you with our buddy system, but also join and inform yourselves as an individual and as a professional. I think that's important. You can't rely on minority groups or challenged groups to inform you. You have to do the work yourself. And that is a big message, big thing that I've learned over the years. In short, the diversity and inclusion, equity and equality is an evolving landscape that thankfully is moving a lot quicker than it was in recent years. And organizations are stepping up to commit to. We do know that there's a fear around getting it right first time. And I think we all need to forget about that. We all need to commit to a journey. We will be making available in the resource hub at the Ulster Society on the Chartered Accountants website all of the presentations today and links to individuals and to companies and to resources that you can jump into. I'm really delighted to have heard about Inclusio mentioned, Siobhan, because Sandra is someone that I'm meeting up with very soon and love the work that's going on there. And I agree with you, best in class, really current, and we should all be supporting as many female entrepreneurs as possible anyway. But without further ado, I want to thank Maeve and the team for having us and hosting us, and everyone for giving of their time. Any questions, reach out, connect. And I'm sure there's a lot for everyone to process there, but let's get started and let's get started together. So thank you so much and wish you all a best rest of week.